kind of the question of what we're going to be doing, how can we do this, how can you bring loose parts in to your story times. But I wanted to ask if you would in the chat just maybe tell me what you think loose parts is, if you use loose parts in any way. And hopefully I can see those, because I tried to type something in the chat and it wouldn't let me. So I'm hoping I'll be able to see the answers. But so if anybody wants to do that, great. Oh, there we go. Now I can see them all. Yes, so open-ended play, open-ended creative activities. Yes. And let's see, I click this to do the next slide. Sorry, this is my first time doing this. So I know this, and it shows that I had 91 slides. And that is because most of them are photos and outlines at the end. So don't be scared that this is going to go over. It's not. But I just really wanted to showcase a lot of visual representation for you all today. Yes, normal everyday things, buttons, metal washers, pom-poms, exactly. So this first slide is kind of talking about the theory, the history behind loose parts play. And this sort of started, the research that I've done and another colleague of mine, it started that we can kind of trace it back to an architect named Simon Nicholson, sort of coined this theory, this verbiage in 1971. And he was an architect, so he wanted to look at playgrounds and other educational settings, classrooms, and he had all these grand ideas of how to redesign them to allow children the freedom to design their own play. So that was sort of his theorizing what he wanted to do so that children could, like I said, like design how they wanted their space to be, as opposed to someone coming in and designing a playground for them. So one example was in the article. I can put it in my slides, or I may have to email you all because I don't think it went into my slides, but there's a whole large PDF article that you can read if you really want to. It's very lengthy. But one of the examples that he brought in large rolls from like a publishing printing house, where newspapers were printed, and he brought them into the classroom, and he left them there, and we started observing the children, and the children, started to roll them, sit on them, roll themselves on them, build with them, climb over them. And so he sort of saw that they were taking a new direction in their play. And so that's kind of where this all started. You can read all the definitions there on the slide. I'm not going to read all of that to you. I know it's a lot, but it's something that you can look back on, later, because you'll have these resources and these slides available to you. So that's kind of where it started. And in the article, it talks about play-based learning and how it focuses on allowing children to generate questions and find solutions to problems through play and experience, which I think we all know. Loose parts are objects in a child's environment that have no specific set of directions. So you can see how all these, and these are all definitions that I found from just different resources, but it's all saying the same thing, basically, that there's no specific set of directions. They can be manipulated, they can be adapted to encourage open-ended learning and creativity. And so in this session, we will explore ways of how to incorporate that play-based learning and loose parts into any learning environments that you have at your libraries, and how to enhance our early childhood experiences and our weekly storytime experiences. So how do we bring in, the whole idea is, how do we bring in this whole idea of loose parts play, which really you'll find in early childhood settings, in early childhood curriculum, in early childhood classrooms. A lot of preschool, toddler teachers are using loose parts a lot now. And so really, when you look it up, if you Google loose parts, you'll find thousands and thousands and thousands of hits of Pinterest pages and how you can design your classroom and how you can organize everything. So it really is an early childhood classroom sort of theory and idea, but we're going to look at how we take it and use it in a storytime library, in our storytime rooms, in our spaces, in the libraries. So continuing here, you can read some more of those definitions. I'll just kind of elaborate a little bit. So in a nutshell, like I said, loose parts play is when children use objects that have no fixed purpose. So we don't give them a bin of play food and pots and say, play with the food and pretend you're in the kitchen. Those things have a fixed purpose. They look at it and know these are pretend pieces of food, and I'm going to pretend to cook them, and I'm going to pretend to put them on a plate, and I'm going to pretend to give them to somebody, and they're going to pretend to eat it. And those are fine things to play with. But with loose parts, what you do, an example with that, is you take random colorful things, objects, that can be manipulated, like we've said, and you put them out for children to see them as they see them through their own eyes and use them to pretend like they're going to cook a meal. So we'll get into that a little bit later. So like I said, toy food in a pan. So rather than playing with toys that have a clear intention, like a toy food in a pan, they're using objects that have no definite purpose. So an example could be if a child's playing with a pine cone, and it could be a magic seed, or it could be a tomato, or it could be a bird, or it could be another animal, or whatever the child wants it to be. It doesn't necessarily need to represent anything at all either. It can just be experimented with. So that's just a little bit more elaborating on some of these concepts and these definitions here. So like I said, we're going to, in the library setting, what I do personally is I provide a small sample of materials along with a story. So we always do a story sharing. And then I let the ideas come from the children and the caregivers as they explore what is presented to them. I wanted to just bring up this slide quickly. These are some developmental domains that are going on in the early childhood, in the early child's brain. And you can see we've got general knowledge in mathematics, self-help skills, language and communication development, social and emotional development, and health and physical well-being. So all of the arrows pointing toward those in the slide are showing what loose parts play, how loose parts play is relating to those developmental domains. So, for example, organization of materials. They have to take the loose parts that they want, and they have to gather them. They have to find a container to put them in, and they have to choose what do they want to use, and they have to make decisions. So those are that's helping towards self-help skills for the toddler or preschool child. And then they're playing alongside other children. So you've got the belonging part, the inclusiveness, including other children, and risk-taking, figuring out who's going to use what. And when you're done with it, you have to put it back where it was so that the next child can play with it. And you're doing, you're being productive, and you're making decisions. So those are just some examples of how loose parts play feeds into these developmental domains in the early childhood brain. So next we're going to go into a little bit about the mainly seven types of loose parts materials. And there is a PDF link at the end in the slide where you can go and find this PDF, and you will have this right at your fingertips. But they're also listed in the slides here. So this is a generalization of 7 types of loose parts materials. And you probably will sort of start to classify them yourself when you see how most early childhood professionals classify them. So first we have nature-based, and that's really the easiest one when you're going to start a program like this, just using what you find outside. And you can do that in a story time. After a story time setting, you can showcase it and teach it and help parents and caregivers engage that at home by encouraging them to take a nature walk and see what you can find outside. So nature-based things would be all of these sorts of things, including the pine cones, seashells, rocks and pebbles, sticks, leaves. You can go on and on and on about what you can find outside in nature. And of course, anything you find in nature, you should return to nature. So when every time we take anything from outside, if we're doing this at my library, then we always go back outside and scatter it back outside for the animals and insects that need those things to survive outside. So that's nature-based. Then we've got wood reuse. So these are going to include things like your old puzzle pieces, cardboard, your paper tubing, any sort of egg cartons, recyclable materials, any kinds of boxes like cereal boxes or small boxes that that are made from thin cardboard. So there's a lot of examples there: newspaper and wrapping paper. Reusing for wooden frames. I have like picture frames. Those are really perfect things to reuse. The other thing I love about loose parts and introducing it to parents and caregivers and then also to children is that you're teaching at a young age the whole concept and idea of reduce, reuse, and recycle, because it really is a lot of reusing things in a new way, and it's not going, to a landfill. So you're teaching that early on. One of the next categories is plastic. So you've got all of these things you can see here. A lot of what I have collected in plastics would be, buttons, lots of different cups, yogurt cups, plastic containers. I really love the clear plastic containers because I like to see what's in it, and I'm going to show you a little bit later behind me on this table that I have some ideas of how I sort of contain things. But you've got, milk caps and bottles, bottle caps, all those kinds of things are really great to put into the plastic category. The next one would be metal, and you would think, we will talk about choking hazards later. Like I said, when I do this program, it's really geared for ages 3 to 8. So, and if I ever have children that are younger than that in it, a sibling or somebody, I always caution that this is meant for children who know not to put this in their mouth. So I caution the parents or caregivers that if their child's going to be there and they're younger, that they're really going to have to keep an eye on them, and because it's really geared for that older preschool to kindergarten age is kind of what the families that we usually get. But you've got your metal, so anything like keys, muffin tins, metal, cans that don't have a sharp edge on them, anything that's been rinsed out like that, doorknobs or drawer knobs that you find that you're not using anymore. Those are all great examples of metal pieces. And then we've got another category, ceramic and glass. I don't use a lot of glass, but it is just a category that people do put out there when they talk about loose parts. But things like flower pots or sea glass or just any like a stone or rock that might be more see-through, those would be considered ceramic and glass. But like I said, and gems, marbles would be a good example. But I don't use a whole lot of that because it's hard to kind of just have that stuff. And I try to find things and use things that people can recycle for me and send to me and that are easy for me to collect. Because I try to do this without any cost to me or very low cost to me. And then another category of organizing would be fabric, yarn, and ribbon. So anything that falls into that category, and that would include, the pom-poms and the cotton balls and any kind of yarn, ribbon, old scarves, pieces of fabric, things like that. Felt pieces, you know, all your little pieces of felt that are your scraps. Those are great things to save, to do this loose parts with. And then we've got packaging and other, so that kind of also relates to recycled and the cardboard and wood reuse, because there's a lot of things here that I've already talked about. But they do categorize it into 7 main categories. So I just wanted to go over that. So if we can now play the video of the children. This is a video from a classroom of some children playing with some clay and using loose parts in this early child. It's a classroom setting. But are we able to play that video perhaps?
All right, 1 second. How's that?
Donald Duck.
Donald Duck. The what?
Oh, I see you getting more excited.
What are you gonna make?
Connor's smashing the clay.
It's rocket.
How do you make a space rocket?
This is baby car. What
are these, CJ?
Potatoes.
The potatoes.
Here.
And this is gonna be
What does it say?
onion.
Oh no! How can you fix it?
Did you put your potato in your sandwich?
What are you gonna do next, Israel?
Yeah.
You rolling it? You squeezing it? And I see Israel pounding it.
You're back, Isaac.
I don't know how it's pounding it.
You do better, don't you? Yeah. You like playing with Legos at the same time that you work. Please. You just have it in the hand, but watch what I'm saying. So that's fine.
Love fish?
It wasn't distracting or anything. Let's see what we can do.
Miss Bonaparte. Yo. You miss your family.
What, Israel?
Do you miss your family?
Do I miss my family? I do. I miss my puppy Nella. Do you miss your family, Israel?
I do. I love my pancha.
You love your pancha? What's pancha?
Please.
My dog.
Oh yeah, your dog.
Troll.
What's that David makes?
I'm making my puppy a color. This is gonna be a sandwich. I'm making a baby walkie car.
A sandwich.
How do you make a space rocket?
I'm making the baby walkie.
I see some gas in your space rocket. What are you gonna do next?
Sandwich bar.
It's a sandwich. I think this is gonna be salad. I'm gonna make a sandwich.
What are you gonna add to your sandwich car?
I don't know.
We don't know. Does it have tomatoes?
You put this
Tomatoes.
onion.
Onions? You like onions?
Okay. So I showed that video. Thank you for doing that. I just like to show that just to kind of get your mind thinking around, you know, they had clay, and but then they also had other, you could see loose parts there. There's pipe cleaners, there was beads, there was those little, I can never remember the name of those little things that you find outside. Yeah, spurs. Thank you, Ashley. Um, those nature-based pieces that you can find out in the world as you take a nature walk. So I like to show that because you can see they were just, there was no rhyme or reason to any, there was no pattern, there was nothing going on there but them cutting the clay and using it how they wanted in their play. And I just think it's a beautiful setting that in that classroom. But you can also see that was a classroom, and obviously we're working libraries, most of us. We're not in classrooms, but you can see how you can translate that into your own space. And that's kind of what we're talking about today, is how to do that, and what's, you know, how you find a story and how you can relate it to a loose parts process play idea after your story time. Now we're going to start running out of time, so I just put in this block play slides just to showcase that, you know, when you start with loose parts, blocks are like the most basic of loose parts play, and most everybody has a set of blocks in the library, so it's a great way to just, you know, if nothing else, you could do a story time on, you know, blocks and building and construction. And I do have an example of a story time like that later. And then you can just put out blocks, and then you've got a loose parts play program in your story time. So I'm not going to really go into all of this. You can read this later. There's development of the stages of block play. I just included this because it is a really easy way to do a loose parts program with something that you probably already have. And then there is a reminder slide here about the stages of play, because when you start getting into doing a program like this with loose parts play, you're going to see, you know, the different stages of play going on. And for me, I just like to know. I just love researching. Yes, that's fun, and that's exactly a great idea, Christy. Putting out Jenga blocks with animals or cars, and that is a loose parts play program right there. But yeah, you can read over the stages of play if you've never, you know, learned about the stages of play that go on at the different stages and ages of children. But you'll see it in a program like this where you can kind of start pinpointing where what stage they're at. So I just put that in there just for some research. So now we're going to go into some photos, a big photo montage. But like I said, this training is really, like, if we were doing this in person, I would have brought all these loose parts and I would have shown you everything, and we would have I would have brought stories and different book titles, and we would have picked out books and maybe worked in a group and taken some loose parts, and we would have pretended like we were the children and gone around and collected our loose parts, and then pair it with a story and think about and plan your own program and an outline of thinking about how you could use this set of loose parts with this story. But since we're virtual, can't really do that. So I'm giving you some photos of just visual ideas for you to take with you. So this is just a beginning sort of stages of loose parts play that I started, and these are actually photos from another person who also sort of incorporates loose parts play in some of her story time. So on the left is an example of putting out these wonderful trays that I love. You can get them at like the Dollar Tree stores, Dollar General, and they're great. They're like your vegetable tray that you would have for a party, but you can use them in your loose parts. So you put all your little loose parts pieces in there, and this is a pizza making activity. So they've got the rolling pins, and you've got all the pieces that they can the different toppings that they could put on their pizza. So this particular librarian, this wasn't mine, but she did a pizza story time, and then this is the activity she provided afterwards, where the children could make pizzas and serve them. And as you can see, it's all laying there, and there's no right or wrong way to really put those together, and the children just make their own pizza slice how they want. And then this middle picture, I think she was doing like a gardening. So she's got some colored rice that's been colored green, and she has these little orange pieces that are carrots. And the children were going, and it was a gardening story time, so they were going and playing with the carrot pieces and picking them out, picking out a carrot, and, putting them back, pretending to make them grow again. And so this middle one is more like a sensory tray, but it's still loose parts. And then the third one, she was using a lot of tubing, cardboard, recycled materials, and I believe she set up like something on the wall where the children could tape different tubes to the wall, and they were making their own contraptions and seeing the balls go down and manipulating them in different ways to see which way the ball would go, depending on where they put their tubes. So that's just a bunch of cardboard and boxes and tubes, and you could do something like that after a story about what is this box for, and I'll give you some examples of some stories later for that. Yeah, and I'm seeing another comment from Christy. I'm loving it, and please feel free to put in the chat any things you're already doing. Chrissy said they used fake leaves in a trowel or a rake, and plastic carrots with Easter eggs and Easter grass, all in a tote or cardboard container. So yeah, that is a wonderful idea. And here's some more examples. PVC piping and funnels and rice, letting them pour it in and seeing it pour out. And then on the right is just another example of fine motor skill activity of just using a pipe cleaner and some dry cereal and making, a bracelet or a necklace. I'm not sure what stories she may have used with that, but I was just borrowing some of her photos just for some other ideas. So this was one of the very first ones I ever did. We read the story The Three Pigs by David Wiesner, and then all I did was put out some shredded paper, pipe cleaners, and red Legos. So if you have Legos, I just separated all the red ones that we had. And I did this at one of my libraries that I worked at before. And so literally read the story, and then the children and the caregivers just went to town. They went and collected the things that they needed. So the paper was the straw, and then we had like sticks and twigs for the stick houses, and then the bricks were for the brick houses. And I also put in some like farm animals and different animals that they could, showcase next to their houses as they made them. So that was just playing along with the story of the Three Little Pigs. And so one thing you can do when you're presenting this and the parents and caregivers are starting to play, I always say that this is the time for them to engage, that this is a play experience for both of them. And you can use some play prompts for the parents and caregivers and saying things like, make observations with your child. So there's an approach called MAP, M-A-P. So you make an observations. So you can just encourage them to start a conversation in a non-judgmental way. And that's also a great way to introduce new words. And then the A is for ask open-ended questions. So think of questions that can't be answered with a simple yes or no. What do you think this is used for? What do you notice about it? Things like that. And then the P is for posing challenges, to pose challenges. So giving their children an opportunity to problem solve by pointing out challenges and encouraging them to make connections with past knowledge. So you're asking questions like, what do you think would happen if you built something with that? Or what would happen if you lined them all up? So just questions like that to pose challenges to them. So we're going to kind of quickly go through some of these photos. These are just, I like to just show these as showcasing different ways that you can present loose parts, what you can use. Here's some examples of some books that you can go along with the cardboard materials. So we're just going to kind of go through some of these. There's a muffin tin with some ideas in it. So you've got your cotton balls, you've got buttons, you've got beads, you've got little pieces of fabric, you've got your little cotton circle rounds, the little swabs. Then we've got some shells over here and one of these pretty fabric trays. So these are, like I said, if you have a light table, it's a great way to use if you have Picasso tiles or any kind of magnet tiles. But you can also use the jar, the little rings off of your like mason jars, and those are great to put on a light table like that. There's some more with the 3 pigs with some shredded paper, shredded cardboard in the bricks. There's just a beautiful tin with some sticks and twigs in it. There's some stones and pebbles. So you'll be able to look at all this again. Here's a great example of Leaf Man. That's a story that I like to use a lot. Putting out materials like that. And just some other ideas there. Using a glass jar to put the stones and gems in. Like I said, Dollar Tree, dollar store, places like that, they're going to have, you know, more affordable ways to gather some things. So these are like wreaths that you would use to make a wreath with, but this is a great way to just give it to a child and see how they play with it. There's some more of those burrs. Thank you for reminding me the name of those. So another theme that I did one time was like self-portraits. So these are examples of after we read a certain story about ourselves or about like feelings or emotions, then the children started making themselves or their parent or whoever was with them. These are just other reusing CDs is a great way to incorporate loose parts because they can use that as their backdrop to put their pieces on. And yes, I'm seeing that comment. Yes, it is hard to control the chaos. And yes, I know. And that is something, actually, a couple weeks ago, one of my colleagues had story time and she did emotions and faces and she put out a bunch of things and sent me a picture of the floor because everything was all over the floor, like pom-poms and yarn and fabric scraps, and it was all mixed up. And yes, we do that, Amy. We do a sorting at the end and cleanup time. So when I do this program, this is actually a Saturday program that I do. It's called Read and Play, which we're going to see in a minute. I knew I need to start hurrying up here. So let me just kind of talk, and I'll just show you these pictures as I talk. But my Read and Play program, that's what I call it, and it is a family story time gathering on a Saturday. So we like our story times are during the week, and I wanted to do this so that we could start having a story time on the weekend for people who work during the week. So we could be more inclusive and make sure we're reaching everybody and make it equitable in our library. So we started offering this on a Saturday morning, and we get a much smaller group. So that helps because at my library, we can have upwards of 100 people at a story time. It's crazy. But on the Saturday program for Read and Play, and we actually have a sign up so that I can kind of gauge how many people are going to show up. And I love that one on the left. That was just some child's version of spaghetti. So, I mean, if you can't look at these photos and just smile, you know, that's just, to me, it's just beautiful. It's alluring. It's just so creative, and I just love seeing what the children come up with. We also just took laminated pieces of paper. These are actually like old placemats from something. You turn them over and use dry erase markers, and they could draw on them. If I did that again, I would make sure I had some other colors though, so that you can have different colors of skin there. Always learning what to do. So these are just some other loose parts that I just put out one time. This is like one of my very first ones, so it was kind of, I just put everything out and it was crazy. So now I do more of themes, and I'm going to quickly go through those. So this is a sort of going into my read and play program at Northeast. Like I was saying, we do it on a Saturday, and usually I read one book, sometimes two, but we offer like a little drink, and we offer a little snack, and sometimes we have coffee for the caregivers. And so that is my read and play program. That's what I call it, read and play. And every month we have a different theme, sort of. And Jennifer is asking, yes, singing a cleanup song, yes. Does anyone else find that kids, particularly slightly older ones, and caregivers are confused by loose parts play? Yes, definitely. The parents, the caregivers are always like, what are we making? And sometimes if I have like styrofoam balls or like things like that, the children will make something and then want to take it because they think it's a craft and they're supposed to take it with them. So I always talk about in the beginning that these are all parts that we're going to reuse, and they're going to stay with, I call myself Miss Erin in Storytime. They're going to stay with Miss Erin here at the library so that we can use them again in the future. And I just always just kind of blanket say that in the beginning. And that usually helps. Sometimes I will have some children who are like, I made this and I want to take it, and I'll let them take it sometimes. But this slide is going into, we also have a family natured play day, so that also incorporates loose parts, and that is really small. I'm really sorry, but I'm not going to read all of that. You can look at that later, but those are our themes for last year for nature play days. So those are all done outdoors, and it's all about loose parts outside. And another one of my colleagues runs that. Another big we have a system-wide program that we started. Our inaugural date was last June, and it's called Greatest Day of Play. So at our library, we are in a sort of like a park-like setting. So you can see we just had multiple stations set up, but I was in charge of the tot lot, and so we did all loose parts, things that we could do outside that day. The whole event is outside. And it was just we had cardboard box playing building area and loose parts play areas. We have a mud pit, so there was lots of loose parts going on there. So these are examples of kind of what happened that day, and the beauty of those children painting on the windows, just putting their handprints on there. I love it. We had a stop, drop, and read area with hammocks. Here's our color dance. That was like a chalk sort of material that's made. It was a vegetable-based product that we found from somewhere, so it was non-toxic, and there was a lot of dust from it, but it was non-toxic. And they stamped their feet and went all over this canvas to a dance playlist, and it was magical. And here's a child playing in a refrigerator box. So this is a big program that we do. Once a year, we do this program called Greatest Day of Play. That's our mud pit. So when we're not playing with it, we cover it with a tarp and let it dry out. But that is completely just a mud kitchen area, completely loose parts. And it's very messy, but that's the beauty of it. And a little side note to Amy, that might be Taraya right there, I think. She knows what I'm talking about. I think that's her. Here's some more children just playing. We have these tree stumps out in our play area. So I'm going to quickly go through. I just really wanted to show you some photos of just the beauty of all of this. These are our themes for 2022. So we didn't do one in January, but then February through December, well, I've done through October. And then, so these are the books that I used, and then sort of the theme concept that we did along with the different programs for that month. And like I said, it's once a month, and I'm going to show you some photos here of examples of what we did. So we did snowballs in February. These are the things that you can gather, and that's a picture of what a child created. So we did snow people. And then in March, we did the self-portraits again. So we did what is a child? And here's some examples. And then in April, we did not a box, not a stick. So we just gathered those things. In May, I did a construction zone edition. So I have a bunch of play trucks, and we used little cardboard pieces and stones and rocks, and then a bunch of egg cartons cut up are great pieces for playing with trucks. Then in August, we did a beach tale. So we did sand play, and we had seashells, and we had some water play. And like I said, it's just play with it and put it back. In September, we did Amara's Farm. And this was an idea I found where you could put out some things to create a tree, but we did colors of fall. So I just put out different colors that relate to fall, the colors that you might see, and they created that way. I didn't have any photos from that day. And then in October, we did Leaf Man. So we just put out leaf play materials. And then in November, we're going to do Stick and Stone. So we'll do sticks and stones, rocks and gems, and mirror boards and trays. And then in December, I'm going to do snow globe wishes. And I think I'm actually going to let them make their own little snow globe. So they will get to take that home. But we're also going to do blanket forts, and we're going to make pretend soup and pretend hot chocolate and things like that. But we're going to also do fort making with blankets and sheets and things like that. And this is just planning ahead for 2023. So this is all things you can look at later. I know I'm going over a little bit. So you can kind of look through the slides if this is something that you want to do, of how to sort of organize things, you know, plan time to organize, figure out how you're going to put things in certain containers that go together. Are you going to do it by color? Are you going to do it by the categories? Are you going to do it by material? Like I said, I start out with just getting recycled containers and putting things in. I like to use clear containers. So these are just some tips of kind of how to start. And so then I gave you a planning guide for 5 different stories that you could use. These are stories, if you've never read any books by Jory Hurley, I love these books, and I need this person to keep writing because I've almost used all of them. So I'm giving you an idea of how you can use, for example, Beehive, and then you sort of identify some loose parts that you could use with that story, and then see what you come up with. So I give you one sort of starting point. So on each slide, there is a starting point for you, and then a prompt for you to come up with some more loose parts that you would use. So that's what all the slides are. Like I said, I wanted to give you ways, something that you could tangibly start using potentially, you know, tomorrow. So more things to consider. Obviously, watching out for choking hazards. We've already talked about prepping them for something new because everybody thinks they're going to make a craft. Just remember that nature things have a shelf life, and that's why I said I kind of just put them back outside. You have to kind of look at your space and storage and see what you can, start to accumulate. And this is an idea that you can just even start with a loose parts box or maybe a cart, and you just put a few things on it, and that's kind of how you start small. But it looks like a lot of you are already using loose parts. Yeah, and I see that comment about caregivers looking at classes, at these programs as being classes. Yeah. So we highly encourage, all of our programs are, this is something that you do with your child, and it's just a conversation to have with them. So these are just some little snippet photos real quick of, instead of putting out a coloring sheet, put out all those loose parts. Instead of a paper plate craft, do a sand exploratory loose parts bin. Instead of another little piece of paper where you cut out the pieces of your pizza and glue them on, have a pizza making story time with loose parts. And instead of doing another toilet paper roll craft, and you can see the mess in that program right there. That was from our STEAM day that we did recently at another library. And that's what it looks like. It's going to be messy. So you have to kind of embrace the mess and know it's coming. But the beauty was that child kept making all these things and showing it to me, and that was that child's smoothie. She had made a smoothie for her mom, and she was taking it to her to drink. So that's why I love this, because that's what comes out of it for me, even though we had to clean all that up. This is an ice cream making one. This is from another librarian who really loves this. She gets much smaller groups, so she can do something like that. I can't really do that one probably at mine because that's just too many little pieces. So here's some resources for you. Thanks for sticking with me. I know I kind of went over a little bit, but hopefully you can go back to the slides and you can look up these resources. A lot of my ideas came from the very first book I ever looked at, which was called Loose Parts, Inspiring Play in Young Children. And these two authors work a lot on loose parts. You'll see a lot of webinars done by them. And there is a free ebook on that one website, but I can send the PDF to maybe Amy and she can send it out. Because when I clicked on that again in the PDF, I couldn't find the PDF, but I have the PDF saved, and it's just an ebook PDF all about it. It's a startup guide to loose parts, so I can send that out. But I really appreciate all the discussion. I don't know if anybody has any questions, but I appreciate your time. And like I said, this is just a passion of mine, so I just really love sharing, my ideas. And I hope you use some of those ideas that I put out there for you on those slides, and maybe create a loose parts play story time soon.